Welcome to the Learning About Dogs podcast with Kay Lawrence and Frances McCormack, and introducing her new collie puppy, Nika. This series is going to be focusing on all those questions that arise when you try and survive that first year with a new puppy. So, welcome back to our first year living with a new puppy and all the important questions that brings up. Today I particularly want to talk with Frances about what we call flexible learning. Yes, very often when we have a new youngster we get very excited that we've got this blank slate that we're going to teach all these things, and we often get carried away by teaching them the things we want them to be able to do when they're a year old, 2 years old. So we might be particularly interested in sports or other sorts of activities, and we tend to set about teaching them those exercises and often ignoring the skills that they should be learning as a learner. So I like the good analogy that we teach children to read and write, particularly handwriting, because it teaches fine motor skills, it teaches a lot of proprioception of one's hands, how one sits when you write, and little things like being able to measure how much space is left on a line to see if you can actually get the word in or not. Yes, you also have to be aware of shapes of letters and how you spell. Now, some of those things you could learn by just using a keyboard. So if we were going to say, well, I want my child to be a writer, why do they have to learn handwriting? Because there are hidden learning skills that come from handwriting with a pen, penmanship, that we wouldn't get if we just used fingers on a keyboard. So absolutely critical that we spend time looking underneath the microscope as what type of learner are they learning when we're teaching them in these first few months, this first year. Critically important. So, yes, so getting tempted, I think another analogy on this is fitness, because of one of my particular passions is good movement and good structure in the dogs. And this often gets mixed up as, well, my dogs are very fit. And I could say, I'm sure they are. They're field fit. They could run up mountains, sail across rivers and do all that sort of stuff. But they don't have the fine motor skills to be able to place their feet accurately if they were doing dressage type work, which is an awareness of how you place that leg as opposed to just bang, it hits the ground. And you can often see this in the dogs that are developed on what I call field work, is that they might have the aerobic fitness, but they don't have that beautiful balance and coordination that will come out of teaching something like dressage works for dogs. So we have to look at the same type of basis as learners. Cool. Okay. So what are we going to put down as the most important skills of learners? So what do you think she's learnt? So how old is she now? She's over 6 months, isn't she?
She is nearly 7 months. My goodness.
So she's on her learning accelerated phase. Yes. Everything wants to be learnt. Learn, as much as possible. And what we learn during this period actually is not that relevant, but what skills she's developing are more relevant. So is it important that she learns how to walk on the left or the right? No. Is it important that she's aware that different cues have a hierarchy? Absolutely. Yes, so picking out what's relevant in her environment and being able to select the relevant things that lead to the outcome that's of value to her is a learning skill. And we can often use different exercises to teach these things. So at the moment she's been learning what exercises have you been doing, but you're paying attention to the skills that she's learning at the same time.
Yeah. She has been learning in terms of exercises. She's been learning targets, so she's been learning to go to a target, in her case, a basket, and just dip her head into it. The skills that she's been learning from that are just so incredibly foundational to the learning that I want to build on for the rest of her life. So she's selecting objects from her environment that are relevant to that particular activity that we're doing together. She's learning
So this is her toy
some.
basket.
Yes,
Yes, right, yeah.
yes. And eventually will be working towards her learning a chain in which she picks up a toy, brings it to the basket, and places it into the basket. But we're just working on, oh, sorry, head into the basket at the moment. She's learning to approach the target from different directions. She's learning all of the components of the learning situation itself. So she's learning that rewards are available if contingent on something that she does. In this particular instance, she's learning what it is that brings about the rewards. She's learning about,
And is she experimenting with that?
I think she is, yes. I saw that initially, that there was some experimentation with, because we started with just here rewards are available.
Mm-hmm.
Um, But now, at the moment, now that she understands, and we set it up very carefully so that she did understand when the rewards were available. Um, Initially, um, they were just available um, as a kind of a lure for her. Um, and so, in that particular instance, it was in this particular activity, should I say, it was very clear to her when the rewards were going to be available and for what. But in other activities, I've seen her maybe select rewards for herself. So we're working on sheep balls at the moment, and so there are some rewards that she anticipates that are not part of the learning future for that particular activity. For instance, holding the ball in her mouth and wanting to jump about and prance with it. So I've seen some experimentation with that.
So sometimes we can see, so say you're teaching a target and you're teaching the target is something she puts her head in or goes towards. And
Hmm.
then when they start to go, okay, I get this now. So I do this and you pay me food. Oh, this is so cool. And you get like sort of a burst of, I'll do this again, 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 again. And then something odd will often pop up and she puts her foot in the basket instead. You go, oh, I hadn't expected to see that. Or she'll tip the
Right.
basket up or suddenly lie down by the basket or something else that she's learnt will suddenly pop and it looks like they're just going, I'm not being creative as such, but let's try that and see if she pays for that as well. And I think that's an important learning skill that today we're learning maths, so let's not talk about geography. Oh, but I was
Right.
learning geography earlier on. Yes, I know you were, but we'll do geography when we do geography. Right now, we're learning maths. We're learning how to count. Okay. Yep. So in a way, we don't want her to go off target, off the subject, yes, and start playing around with other things and see if you pay for that. We can take a note of it and go, that's interesting, but right now, this is what I'd like you to focus on because absolutely it's a core skill to stay focused on the one thing that we're learning and taking that thing forward with all its baggage and not going, oh, if I experiment with that, can we change subject? Oh, can we go off and do that instead? Because if we start to reinforce that, they're going to be wandering around their learning library like, oh, I'll read this book and I'll read that book. I won't finish any of them, but I'll pick lots of
Mm.
books up and read them. Or with, so we end up with a scatty learner as opposed to a focused learner.
Yeah. I've seen some tendencies towards that with Tiernan, who doesn't have the same kind of learning history as Nika, because with Tiernan, I wasn't quite as focused on what the dog is learning and was instead more focused on getting the behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result, for instance, when he does the same action of placing his head into this basket, and at first he would occasionally tap it with a paw.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to see that more with him, and I'd also see perhaps we're working on a different activity at the moment, and he might request then something else by engaging with that object differently. Yeah,
Okay, so
yeah,
you got led around the library just a little bit. You said, "Oh, as
I
long as he's
did.
reading books, that's fine."
Yes, yeah,
I think this is Yeah, I mean, part of this is the cultural thing of, shaping behaviour and offering, where people
Mm,
get led along by the dog, trying this, trying that. Oh, there's a good one, I'll have that. Yes, where they often sit down to do some training with the dog, but they don't have a clear idea of where they want the learning to go, or they're uncertain whether they should say, no, today is maths and you cannot do geography. But
yes.
goodness me, it's so critically important that we have a way to say to them, that's interesting, but it's not our subject right now. So let's get back on target, on track, and stay with what we're learning. But you'll often see this popping up, but it's a sort of it's a discipline we need as a teacher as well as a to put into the learners, that we need to stay with this subject. It could be a bit of an indicator that they're getting a bit fed up with the repetitions, or they would like to try something else. But in a way, you can't let them go off track on that. It's not good
Yeah.
learning discipline at all.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I suppose in 2 or 3 years ago, I would have looked at Tiernan and I would have thought, wow, what an enthusiastic learner, what a creative learner. He's trying so many different things. And I would have looked at Nika and the way she is consistently putting her head into the target, and I would have thought, that's a bit uninspiring. But I actually understand now that what's happened is that Nika has had a far more better planned learning history than Tiernan has. And so she's
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely assured about what earns that reward. And she's keen on that reward and doesn't need to flit about in the same way that sometimes I see Tiernan
yeah, yeah,
doing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we yeah, it's I mean, it's an example of how we get mistracked, misled about um, oh, well, the dogs need to be operant and try lots of things, and usually that comes out of the person that's in charge of the library, unable to attract or keep the dog on, or the learner on target to the one specific thing. So if you don't know how to initiate that behaviour's pathway, you tend to become the backseat and let the dog try it until they end up hitting the right thing. In actual fact, that's not what we're looking for at all. We do want to be able to set up the learning for success, and certainly we need them to have confidence to be flexible in what they learnt. But that's not the same as them telling us what they want to learn. Yes, so something like putting their head in a container. Yes, it's like you could just put this thing on the floor and sit there with your clicker and your food and you wait for the dog to do something with it. Some dogs will tap it with their foot, some dogs will rest their head on it, some of them might look in it. Now, if you definitely want them to look in it, then you need to invite that behaviour to happen and make sure the other things are unlikely to happen, so that we set it up. There's a high probability of what we're looking for is what's going to happen. Now, say then the dog starts to put their foot on it, and you say, "Oh, okay, well, I'll click that to start with because it's some sort of interaction with the object." You are asking an awful lot of a young learner to learn something and then unlearn that when we want them to put their head in it instead. So just because it's an interaction with the object, it's nothing to do with what we want in the future. We have to say, okay, let's take a break, let's take this out right now, because it's too asking too much of our learners to be able to be sometimes right and sometimes not right within the same session or later on. So if we don't have the imagination or the experience to set up clean learning, then we really shouldn't set it up that the dogs have to try and struggle to find out what we want them to learn. But that's not the same as a flexible learner. And as you said, so say we have this target that we want the dog to interact with, we've got the right interaction, which is she pops her head in the target. Now we start off with this basket is going to stay in a consistent spot. Yes, she goes over, she has a rummage around, there's nothing in there, she got her click, and now your piece of food goes off to her left. So she goes over there to get it, and she comes back, puts her head in the basket, and your piece of food now goes in front. So that the piece of food that she goes out to collect will be placed deliberately around the target, so that each time she eats and thinks, where's my target? It's in the same spot, but she might approach it in a different way. So if we put the food close to the basket, it's just a turn of the head. If we put the food 3 feet away, she's going to have to turn around and walk towards the basket. or she might have to go up the stairs and come back down again or climb on the sofa. But each time that basket's in a consistent spot, but the flexibility comes in how she returns to it. Yes, we've already set it up that she wants to return to it, but then the flexibility is that one element of how does she approach it. We can do it the other way round in the next session, where she comes and gets her food from a bowl, yes, because she's used to a food bowl, and you could be sitting there with your pot of food ready to reward her, and the food bowl is near the reserve of food. She puts her head in the basket, and you walk over and you collect the food from your pot, you put it in the bowl on the floor. While she's eating that, you move the basket. So now when she turns around from her food source, basket's not in the set. Where's the basket? Oh, it's over there. I need to go and look for it. So now we have another little element that's become flexible in that she's food is in a consistent spot, but the actual target is moving around the room. So she's now learning how to go and seek her target. And that target can be anything. She could be standing on it with her feet. She could be sitting on it, yes, lying down on a mat. Those targets can be anything, but the flexible learning comes of finding the target, going to the target, approaching the target, but all that flexibility happens once at a time. We don't try and do it all in one go. Yes, especially for a youngster, because they can be overwhelmed by the food's over there. Oh my God, where's the target? I can't find it, hells. Oh, and then the food's over there, and I'll chase that down, but and just move the target, and we can end up overwhelming them by changing too many things too quickly.
Yes, and in fact, that was a mistake I had made early on when I was trying to place the target. It was in my hand, I was trying to place it to the floor, and I just did too much in one session. And um, there were also lots of things that I didn't keep consistent. So
So
the
what did it look
position
like?
of the room.
So what did that inconsistent, the overwhelming changes? What did it look like? What made you step back and go, "Ooh, this is"?
When I was, yeah, when I was watching it back on video, I could see some hesitation. I could see just a bit of hmm from her.
And
And
that
I
was it.
don't want hmm.
And that was a change from how she normally does it.
Yeah, normally it would be sort of very clear, very consistent, very determined,
Hmm.
and a real demonstration of understanding. But in this particular instance, it was a slight hesitation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
I can see
not
that
not an
that loss of determination, that just little uncertainty coming in.
yes.
If a dog's going to put their feet on the target, they'll come back and they'll whack it. Yep, and they'll give it a
Hmm.
slap. I know what I've got to do here. Yep, and if they're just like, oh, okay, and they'll
Yeah.
do it, but there's that sort of small degree of uncertainty about it. Something's happened that we have pushed one step too far in too
Hmm.
many changes. Yes, there's something inconsistent. The contingencies are not consistent enough for them to be, yeah, let me at it. Yes, and
Yes.
that certainly builds learning hesitation. Yeah, and then we start to lose our confidence as a learner. Yeah, and
Yes.
even people
And
learning something is important that you have that. Yeah, I know what to do. I know what to do. I know how to do this. And the minute you go, I'm not sure what to do. Oh, I need to take a break. Let's go for a walk. Yep,
yeah.
so we don't forge on with that ounce of uncertainty because it's going to get bigger.
Yes.
Yeah, the
And,
ounce of
and I think
uncertainty.
I think in part it comes from the tension between how many of us have been led to believe that the focus should be on quote unquote getting the behavior. The focus should be on the end
Any
results and
way
you want to get
possible.
there as
Yes. Mm.
fast as possible.
Yeah.
And losing that sight of this is a young learner with no experience of this kind of learning. And what we want is for her to develop all of these skills that are going to benefit her in other future learning
Yes.
experiences.
Absolutely. Yes.
Understanding how to select what's relevant, understanding how to learn with slight variability every time, understanding when rewards are available and how to attain them. It's like the example of reading. If you don't know a familiar word, you can look it up, an unfamiliar word, you can look it up in the dictionary, but in order to do that, you have to learn you have to learn how alphabetization works.
Mm-hmm.
You have to learn what the head word is in the dictionary and where the definition is found.
Mm-hmm.
You have to
Mm-hmm.
understand all of these different elements. And they're so important. I think we don't pay, I'm speaking as somebody who is is relatively new to this world of thinking about skills. I certainly didn't pay any attention to them before. And I have to
Yeah.
keep reminding myself.
But it's in this, the same way as you're talking about, when students these days are learning and you say, oh, well, you can look it up online. If you don't know what the keywords are, you can't look it up online because you don't know what it's called. Yes,
Hmm.
and you end up fishing around with words because you're not able to describe or hit the right word to ask the question that you need to ask. Yeah, it's
Hmm.
yes, it's very easy to get misled about what is good learning and what is good education. And in a way, what we're trying to do is build a well-educated puppy that has the
Yes.
skills to be able to say to you, at this moment in time, I do not know what you're asking for, or can you listen to me when you say, hey, put your feet on that, and they look at it and go, I've never seen that before, and you go, yes, it is. It's the same as what you go, oh, from the dog's point of view, it's not the same as what you had before. There's something too different about this that they don't recognize it. So us being able to teach and ask questions of them is very much about our skill to be able to listen to what they're actually saying, as opposed to just taking somebody else's expectations as to what should be happening or not happening. Yep.
Mm. And I love that from the dog's point of view. In fact, that's what I'm going to ask myself now when I'm reflecting after every session and I'm watching back the video
Mm-hmm.
from the dog's point of view. What specifically um, would this look like?
Well,
Or
I
what
mean, we
does
had
this
this
look
when you were trying to teach, when you teach you something like the match to sample. If you
like?
hold up an object and you look at it in your hands, is that the same view that the dog's going to get when you put it down on the floor? It's not. It's a different view because they have a lower perspective. Or we might ask them to go around a cone, and we say, well, a cone is a cone. No, they're not. Cones are different. Or,
Mm-hmm.
if you want them to get up on something, is a chair the same as a sofa? No, it's not the same. So is the dog able to transfer a concept like that, unless they've actually learnt those skills as a learner? And it doesn't have to be at her age, she's soaking up everything she's learning. So you're building her learning skills as a priority. But
Mm-hmm.
if she's learning to, if we focus too much on the exercise, oh, I want my dog to retrieve, you get too hung up on they must retrieve this object this way and in this direction. Whereas in actual fact, the skills are about being able to run towards something and assess how to do what you need to do when you do that. Well, that could be simply like running towards the sofa, and at which point do they take off to be able to land on the sofa as opposed to run into the sofa, so that perceptive skill of running towards something and not crashing into it or overrunning. And if they're retrieving, can they take hold of this off a multitude of different types of surfaces? So it's not just one item on a grass or a mat surface. Can they actually pick up their toy when it's landed in the flower bed? So all the
Mm-hmm.
skills that we bring from other learning will affect how they learn retrieve. But if we teach only retrieve, we can actually miss many of the skills that we want them to actually learn. Good. Okay, so yes, building up a good library of books, not behavior, learning skills sets up a learner that has the flexibility to be able to learn anything in the future. And that doesn't matter what age they are. So even if we're what they politely call the third age learners, we still had a good enough flexible learning history that if we tackle something, we can bring all our other skills to that rather than just say, I don't know how to do it. You know,
Absolutely.
it's the classic one where um, I'm talking about 20 odd years ago, where they were trying to reskill workers from a particular environment, and they had dismissed themselves as, oh, I'll never learn that. It was computer skills they were asking them to learn. I'm just a housewife. Oh my goodness me. As a housewife, you have all the skills we want to be able to take into, computer skills. What do you mean? Well, you can organise laundry, you can sort out shopping lists, you know how to do your finance, so all the skills that they had from one type of learning format absolutely transfer to another area. To believe that you can't do computer stuff because I'm only a housewife or I haven't learned how to do that is ridiculous. But it's a good example of how we have these skills that are developed in one field and they're flexible enough to be able to take to another field, and we bring them forward with us. Same for the
Yes.
dogs, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think it's a good exercise for us to, I know you're very fond of keeping journals and notebooks of what the dogs are learning, of their cues and so on.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important for us to regularly reflect on what are the skills that the dog is developing, what are the skills that I can draw on to build on this new learning that I want to implement? Where are the skills gaps? And just to kind of keep that
Mm-hmm.
thinking fresh. I'm realizing how important that is with Nika
Yes,
as I'm
yes.
seeing this, because I took for granted when she arrived here, and I've said this before, that she came with a package of skills that she hadn't come with, and it was unfair on her really to be thinking of her in the same way as I would think of Tiernan, who already has built up that library of
Mm-hmm.
skills.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really useful to be very mindful of that, you know,
Yeah,
where the skills are and where they aren't.
absolutely. Yes, yes, yeah. Lovely. Good. Excellent. So she's going to have an exciting few months of learning lots of new skills. I mean, one of the things you sort of brush past there were cues. We tend to think a cue is something that you say or you whistle or a signal from your hand. But, when we're teaching targets are cues. So having that um, learning skill where there is certain stimulus, of which may be an object, it could be an activity, a way you move, a way you speak, an environment, a scent. All of those are cues that lead to something the dog responds to, is stimulated to do, and ends up earning them a reward. We get stuck in this view that, cues are things that come from us. Absolutely not. Targets are one of the best ways of saying that cues can be objects, and objects come in all sorts of varieties. I mean, I love objects as a cues because if you screw it up, you can just go and get another one. Whereas if you screw up saying something that's important for the future and they learn the wrong thing, it lasts a lifetime. Lovely. Okay, well, that's an excellent point for everyone to be chewing over and looking at learning skills. Yep, lovely. Thank you very much, Francis.
Thank you, Kay.
Thank you for listening. We shall be following Nika's first year through the podcasts. If you would like to learn more, please have a wander around our website, learningaboutdogs.com. We have many, many articles and lots of courses that you can explore. We also have Facebook pages, which is Kay Lawrence and Learning About Dogs. So if you have any questions on first year topics or anything else you'd like us to focus on, please use the Facebook pages and ask. See you next time.